a book on postmodernism called Explaining Postmodernism, and it's in quite a few languages now, and just this year it came out in Tel Aviv in Hebrew, so I'm very happy about that.
What is it about?
Well, it's about postmodernism, which is a challenge to all of the ideas and institutions of modernism. So it's typically the anti-liberal, anti-Marx, anti-engineering, anti-science. It tends to view current modern civilization as based on rationality and a certain kind of power politics that's really just a cover for all kinds of dark things. So some of the famous philosophers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, all of them philosophers in the postmodern gamut, have been very influential. So deconstruction is one of them. Yes, that's right. Instead of the idea that yes, texts are complicated and they can have multiple meanings, but ultimately words connect to reality, and we try to figure out the way the world works and what really matters for human beings. Postmodernists are very cynical and skeptical about that. My thoughts on Jewish education would be similar to all religiously based education. And one of the challenges there is that it comes in many sub-forms. And some aspects of Jewish education I'm familiar with, I think, are very dangerous. And some aspects of it, I think, are excellent. So the dangerous parts have been what many religions have in common, the idea that there is one truth that has been delivered a long time ago, and you should not question that truth. You should be afraid to think for yourself and experiment and try new things. And I know there are some subsectors of Jewish education that go down that road, as is true in Hindu and Islamic and Christian education as well. At the same time, in the tradition of Jewish education, there's been a strong tradition of commenting on all of the core texts, and not just authorized rabbis, but anyone, including school students who are learning, trying to think about what the text means, alternative interpretations, and engaging in a conversation. And that, I think, has served Judaism very well. One indication of that I find is in my own profession, for example, philosophy, which is all about arguments and counter-arguments, and it can become very almost vicious, right, at some point, but a certain aggressiveness about ideas. A significant number of brilliant philosophers do come out of Jewish schools because they acquired that second kind of Jewish education. And in many cases, students who come out of other religious traditions, if they are told, just accept things on faith, don't question, who are you to think that you can contribute any knowledge to on these important matters? If they teach that intellectual obedience and humility, that's very dangerous. So I have a mixed reaction.
Because in Judaism, it's very important to ask questions. Like in the Pesach, one of the main religious celebrations, the one that we celebrate liberating from Egyptian slavery.
Oh, sure.
Yes, it is based on questions. It is based on the 4 questions. So maybe it is a little bit more like your perception.
Well, I hope so, yeah. And that long-standing tradition, right, I know that it was there. So at this level of abstraction, I would say, yeah, there are many religions, and of course non-religious philosophies that will say, in fact, there are no questions, there are only answers, and we have the answers, we the authority figures. And while I do think that we actually do know a lot of things, some of the traditions, but certainly in the modern world we have learned a lot, but there are still a huge number of questions. And that cliche that the more you learn, the more you understand how complicated the world is, and you should be open to all of those questions, including going back, and every generation has to think for themselves about all of the big assumptions of the current generation. There might be very good assumptions and all true, but it doesn't do the new generation any good just to accept them without understanding and without questioning them and thinking, well, what are the alternatives? And if they really are good, then they will be able to withstand that challenge.
And what would be a classroom if you had to do it?
Yeah, I think that's very hard. I think there are two things that we want to do in education. One is all students are human beings, and so we all have the same human needs and the same human capacities. We have a big brain, so we can be very smart. We have bodies, and we have physical needs. We have emotional capacities, and so on. So a certain level of generality, we all need to learn to use our bodies, use our senses, cultivate our emotions, cultivate our general thinking habits. And so basic physical education, mathematics, reading, writing, all of those general skills, I think, are important. Now, what the school would look like, I think that's very hard, because the other thing that we grapple with is that human beings are very different. Some of us are more studious and like to read. And so the ideal classroom for that person is going to be a quiet place with lots of books. Some people are much more physical, and they like to take things apart and be exposed to lots of machines and technologies, and it's going to get very dirty and messy. So what would the ideal classroom be like for that person? Or someone who is scientifically curious, or a young artist who just loves mixing colors, or a dancer whom we're hoping to see very soon. So at a certain point, the ideal classrooms would be customized very quickly to the needs of the individual students.
Like
personalized, absolutely. So parents know this, and so they, to the extent they have the resources, want to go in that direction. But I think schools need to be much more responsive to that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, real pleasure.